Hi guys. So I know I already did a full video covering the astrology for the end of July, but after that video that I posted about a day and a half ago, I received a lot of emails between last night and this morning, and like I lost count after 40. So it was enough for me to say, let me hop back on here and let me go a little bit deeper and have a little bit of a deeper conversation about this Jupiter Cazimi, right? Because a lot of you do seem super genuinely concerned, about the astrology that's coming up. So I just wanted to come back on, give you a little bit more of an extensive and focused reading on this Cazimi. That's happening on July 29th. Maybe you didn't watch the video, maybe you did. If you did, you know what I'm talking about. Because the way that this Cazimi is positioned, with everything else interacting with it, we're not going to be able to ignore it. Now, I do want to say, I don't want anyone looking at one challenging aspect and immediately assuming that something terrible is going to happen. Astrology is never that simple. And keep in mind that on here, I'm doing it for the archetype for each of the rising signs, which, by the way, that's the most important sign that you have to understand only because it drives your birth chart. I think they're all important, but you know what I'm saying. It's what drives your birth chart. But it's really important to understand that whatever's going on in your birth chart, wherever Jupiter is going to be amplified, right? So it's important to look at your chart, look at your Leo placement, and understand whatever is within 10 degrees of that Leo placement is going to be amplified. So if it's Leo, awesome. If it's Jupiter, awesome. If it's Mars, don't start any arguments. You know what I mean? Like it depends on what it is. So just keep in mind that these are general readings, okay? General readings. And it's a very complex configuration because yeah, there's tension, but there's also so much potential for healing and expansion and waking up, right? Just to this completely different understanding of something that you've been living for quite a while, okay? Now, before I go any further, I do want to remind you guys that I am currently running a special on my 1 hour consultations. The discount's already applied on the booking site, so you don't need a discount code. And we could just talk about whatever you want. We could talk about your birth chart. We could talk about your current astrology. Whatever transits might be very meaningful for you right now, and you could book that directly on my booking site. Now let's dig in. I'm going to do an intro, and then I'm going to go through all the rising signs, and then I'm going to do a closing up section. So you don't have to listen to all the signs, obviously, but please do listen to the intro and listen to your rising sign at least. Your sun and moon, that would be great as well. It'll give you more of a layered, textured message, and then listen for the closing. So let's talk about this Jupiter Cazimi and full moon configuration on the 29th. Very powerful full moon in Aquarius. One of the biggest features of this astrology is this Jupiter Cazimi in Leo, though, right? Out of all of that that's going to be happening at the end of the month. Jupiter is going to be at 6 degrees, conjuncting Hygeia at 5 degrees in Leo and Vulcan at 8 degrees in Leo. And across the sky, the concentration in Leo is going to be opposing the moon, Pluto retrograde, and Juno retrograde in Aquarius. At the same time, Jupiter Cazimi is trining Neptune retrograde at 4 degrees in Aries, sextiling Uranus and Sedna in Gemini, squaring Chiron and Taurus. So this is pretty big astrology. And I don't want to reduce Jupiter Cazimi to the idea that something wonderfully is simply going to fall on your lap. All right. No shade to any other astrologers whatsoever, but I can't ignore everything that this transit is speaking to. So this Kazemi can bring a lot of illumination, a lot of expansion, opportunity, confidence, depending on where it is for you. Certainly truth, because Jupiter is very connected to the truth and protection and a much clearer understanding of what's possible. But Jupiter is also a planet that magnifies whatever it touches, right? So going back to what I was saying about your own personal birth chart, you have to understand what's also speaking to it in your birth chart, right? Because that's going to be whatever's connected to whatever is within 10 degrees is going to be very illuminated. And also, whatever's connected to Pluto, Juno, Chiron, Uranus, Sedna, Neptune, Hygeia, Vulcan, and this full moon are all going to be very, very lit up. So, obviously, something is going to be going on that's impossible to ignore. Now, the Leo side of the astrology is really wanting you to answer the question of what you want in that Leonine energy, right? So, just to remind you what Leonine energy is, Leo rules the fifth house, children, falling in love, love affairs, romance, entrepreneurial efforts, monetizable talents, your hobbies, taking a chance. Gambling is in the fifth house too. Going on vacation, but just also your general joy, right? What makes you feel alive? Where are you ready to take up more space in your own life? And where have you been waiting for this permission? And it's not even real, and you know it's not real, but it's this weird kind of permission just to become more visible and creative and confident and self-directed and out there because a lot of vulnerabilities could have been holding you back, right? Now, this Jupiter Kazemi can bring this moment of profound clarity around all of that, these aha moments around the relationship or the thing with your children or having a child, or maybe you realize you don't want children, or maybe you realize you don't want to have your own business, or you do want to have your business. Whatever it is, obviously, it's going to be very subjective according to your own chart. But the Aquarius side asks a very, very different question, right? Where Aquarius comes in is like, what has to change in order for you to actually live that life that you were just talking about in the Leo energy? Like, what has to change? Pluto retrograde in Aquarius really should show you, does reveal at some point a deeper psychological truth. He exposes the power dynamics or the buried fears or the compulsive patterns or the control issues or just the situations that have quietly gained too much power over you that maybe you didn't realize up to this point. And because Pluto's retrograde, a lot of this is going to be happening very internally. Now, you're likely going to recognize that the biggest obstacle is not necessarily another person or even an external circumstance when it comes to this, right? For a lot of us, most of us, it's going to be recognizing this old survival pattern, right? A fear, an attachment, or just this identity that you've outgrown. And Juno retrograde adds this other layer because Juno is connected with that idea of commitment, loyalty, contracts, marriage, partnership. Not everybody's married, not everybody's in a relationship, but it's really looking at what are you committed to in your life, right? And the agreements that you make with other people, including ourselves, right? But psychologically, Juno can also represent this this deep agreement, yes, that we have with ourselves, but that we made a long time ago and that we can't ignore it anymore. So you can realize that you've remained very loyal to something that's just no longer right for the version of yourself that you're becoming. And you might not even consciously become it. Some of you may be like, that's it. I want to change. I want to change my job. I want to change my relationship. I want to change whatever. But a lot of us are going to be going through this where it's like, what the hell happened to the old version of myself? How did I get here? Do you know what I mean? Because it's been happening quite slowly over the past couple of years. And this full moon can bring this realization to an enormous peak. Now, we do have to just kind of unpack this Hygeia and Vulcan energy, which is all about healing and strength and just what you can no longer ignore, right? When we throw these two guys together, it's what you can no longer ignore. Now, Hygeia conjuncting Jupiter places enormous emphasis on the idea of healing and health and purification, right? Because Hygeia's glyph is even the health symbol, right? The medical symbol. Puts a lot of focus on prevention and the recognition that something needs to be handled differently before it becomes difficult to manage. So, very, very relevant for those of you who maybe, and I am not judging here, people, please know that, but maybe you've been drinking a little too much, you've been smoking a little too much, you've been a little too promiscuous, or spending a little too much money, or doing a little fill in the blank too much, right? This can certainly have a literal connotation to health for some of you, but it could also just be psychological or in another part of your life. But Hygeia is asking you to really look at what are you repeatedly exposing yourself to. What are you consuming emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually? Now, literally across the board, like what are you consuming when it comes to music and movies and things that you're watching online and all of these things? What patterns have become normalized just because you've lived them for such a long time, where you're recognizing that it's just who you are. Now, Vulcan adds strength to that and pressure and this process of forging something stronger through heat. Vulcan is very connected to this idea of heat. So, this period can be a time when you recognize your own strength. Strength is very fire. Okay, it's very fire, but it can also show you where you've been surviving through the sheer force of will, equally so. And there's a difference between being strong and constantly having to prove how much you can endure, right? And so there's no ignoring this anymore. Now, on top of this, we have this Neptune retrograde in Aries. This is just the vision behind the change, right? And that's what it is, because Aries is very connected to, fresh path, a new beginning, the path that you're walking on, your ability to have agency, right? But we have Neptune is retrograde, and it's trining that Jupiter Cazimi. So we're trying to lovely, right? It's at 4 degrees in Aries, incredibly important here, guys, because it's adding a very spiritual, intuitive, and imaginative and visionary kind of dimension to the entire configuration. Neptune can turn the search for meaning, which he does this, when he's direct, it's like, what is it all about, kind of thing, right? But when he's retrograde, it goes inward. So something that you once maybe projected onto another person, and this is very important, whether it was that dream, a relationship, a career, a belief system, or even some sort of like future that you imagined, right, in your mind's eye, right, now needs to be understood on a much deeper level. You're going to feel, if you're really working with the energies here, you're going to feel like somebody just peeled back the curtain, and you're going to realize, whoa, okay, maybe I've been putting a little too much on this person, or that person's been putting a little too much on me. Whatever it is, there's going to be clarity after this, right? Because Neptune is retrograde. This can involve looking at that idea again, that relationship, that dream, that thing. But looking at it again doesn't necessarily mean giving up on it. And that's really important. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here, but it may mean asking whether that dream, that idea, that vision that you had for yourself in your mind's eye, does it still even belong to you? Because it might mean separating genuine intuition from fantasy, from something that you idealized through a different lens, always working with the information that you knew. So you do need to have grace with yourself, but it may mean recognizing where you've idealized that person or that relationship or that potential situation, or it may mean reconnecting with a vision that you just let go of and abandoned because life became too difficult, too practical, too demanding, whatever it was. But that trine between Jupiter and Neptune can create tremendous faith and imagination and creativity and compassion and so much spiritual insight. So stay open to that. Now, Jupiter in Leo wants to believe in the possibility of a bigger life. It's Jupiter. Jupiter's like the wild, like early 20 something who kind of knows where they want to go, but he hasn't experienced enough of life yet. And I stand by that. I know Jupiter rules Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is the sign of the professor and the sign of the wise one and all of that. Jupiter is a wild child. That's why Saturn is very annoyed by him. Because Saturn is chill and he's old and he's wise and he's all that. And it's Jupiter's like, come on, let's go. Jupiter's quick. He's quick, 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 quick. But He is the beautiful benefic. He is optimistic. He believes in bigger fill in the blank, right? And that Neptune in Aries is asking, though, whether you're willing to trust that your own inner guidance, your own inner voice, enough to begin moving toward that thing that you're realizing would be a better way for you to go. But because that Neptune again is retrograde, the answers will not come from outside of you. They won't come from another person. They won't come, it's from you. So you may need to become quiet enough to hear what you already know. You already know the answer to this. But it's almost like all of these walls are between your conscious mind and that answer. And what are those walls are made up of fears and wanting to protect yourself and all of this. So this can be really incredible for you and really incredible, just incredibly creative as well. So good for those of you who are the creative types. I don't care what kind of art it is, whether you're an artist, a writer, a teacher, a healer, spiritual practitioner, an entrepreneur. I mean, really name it, right? You can make anything creative or just anyone trying to bring something tangible into form in your life. This can very much open the imagination, and you may suddenly just see this possibility that you couldn't see before and understand this deeper meaning behind something that you've experienced, right? You went through something. And so, and even if it was really difficult, suddenly it's just going to come upon you. It's like, oh, now I see. Right? Now I get why that thing happened to me, right? And what's on the other side of that realization is this reconnection to hope. But Neptune always, not sometimes, always requires discernment, right? Because remember, Neptune rules like addiction and self-sabotaging behavior. He's very good, but remember, Neptune rules Pisces, and Pisces is the twin fish going in opposite directions. It's like unconditionally loving and giving, but this fish is like, no, I want to destroy myself, right? So it's that kind of energy. So you just have to keep your feet on the ground and question everything, have the discernment. It's very much an inspired faith. It just is. And it's combined with a lot of psychological honesty, which I love for all of us. Now, if Pluto is revealing the truth, Neptune can help you imagine what that actually means and what comes after that. Do you know what I mean? Where Pluto's like, all right, this is what's really going on. And then Neptune's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. But we just want to keep our feet on the ground. And if Chiron is exposing the wound in that Taurus energy, Neptune can remind you of that wound and remind you that that is the part of your life right now that needs some extra focus. Because that's always the deal. So wherever your Taurus energy is, that's going to need some extra focus right now over the summer. And then Uranus is going to go back into Aries in September until next spring. Then he'll move back into Taurus for 7 years. But right now, he's just in that Taurus energy for the summer. And then if Uranus is breaking down old patterns here in all of this energy, Neptune can help you envision a different future. So all of this having to do with the Jupiter cazimi is really illuminating what's possible here, right? Neptune can reconnect you with that deeper meaning behind why you want it in the first place, right? Now let's talk a little bit more about that Chiron and Taurus, because what's happening here is like, because I don't want to isolate anything, right? Because because astrology can't be separated, right? So you have Chiron and Taurus, but the growth that you're going through is what's touching the wound. Okay? So and to square this square to Chiron in Taurus is extremely important, because however it is that you're growing requires you looking at this wound at the same time. I know, right? I know. I know. Why can't we just have growth and fun and not nice stuff and not have to look at the wound part, right? But Taurus is very connected to your sense of self, your self-esteem, security, stability, money, your body, survival, and what allows us to actually feel grounded. Taurus is also very connected to the general health of our internal body. Taurus rules what we eat. He rules the mouth. He rules the right eye. What else does he rule? A thyroid. Thyroid. But Chiron here can expose the places that you just don't fully trust. That you, meaning you don't trust that you're going to be safe. if you make the change. Right? You may know that something needs to expand, something needs to end, or change, or evolve, whatever it is. But another part of you is like, well, what happens if I lose my security? What happens if I let go and I'm not supported? And what if I'm not enough? What if I just screw it up and I can't figure it out? And that doesn't necessarily mean that you should ignore those concerns. Those are very valid concerns that a normal thinking person would probably experience. But Chiron isn't asking you to abandon common sense. He's not. But he's likely going to be showing you the difference between a legitimate practical concern and a fear that's been making your decisions for you up to this point. Now, at the same time, we have that Uranus and Saturn in Gemini, and this is just like it's a different angle of looking at everything, but we have to look at it because it's Uranus and he's loud and he demands attention, right? So this connection to Uranus and Saturn in Gem can bring information and very Geminian things, conversations, ideas, revelations, unexpected developments, or a completely different way of understanding your situation. Uranus can break a fixed pattern. So we're already breaking fixed patterns with the Jupiter Cazimi, and Uranus is just coming in and bringing it all home. Now, Sedna brings up these themes around very Sedna-like things. If you're not familiar with Sedna, she's very connected to, as very psychological, to betrayal and abandonment and powerlessness and survival and the process of reclaiming power after circumstances have changed you. But what Sedna also wants you to understand with that Uranian energy is, I'm not going to say it's not in your own mind. It 100%, it's very connected to your external circumstances, but you're going to be realizing where you've been holding yourself back. And in that Gemini energy, the mind becomes part of your liberation. A simple conversation can change something. Information coming to you. I don't care from where. Could be the internet. Doesn't matter. Can just change something for you. A new idea can change something where you're likely suddenly going to understand your entire story very differently. And so the deeper message here is that that expansion is going to require psychological honesty, though, right? Because you can't always create a bigger life while continuing to protect every part of the smaller life that you've actually outgrown. So something here needs to be negotiated and healed and released. It just does. And something within you is going to finally feel ready to become much larger than the fear that's been containing it. Okay. Now, before we get into the individual rising signs, I just want to say something that I think is important whenever we're looking at tricky astrology, right? The nice astrology, easy astrology, which, okay, it's all good. There's no bad, okay? But sometimes we have to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps sometimes we have to be very mindful of keeping our feet on the ground. So a couple of things that I just want you to be mindful of. All right, I understand that some of you may be going through a genuinely difficult time right now, and when that's the case, as I think we've all been there in one way or another, I never want to sit here and tell you simply to think positively as though a positive attitude is going to make everything disappear, because I know it doesn't. Sometimes life is hard. Sometimes we're dealing with stuff we didn't choose. We can't immediately change, or we know damn well we never asked for it, at least not in our conscious mind, right? But I do believe that our mindset matters enormously in how we move through these experiences. There's a difference between acknowledging that something is difficult and deciding that because it's difficult, nothing good can come from it. There's a difference between being realistic and becoming hopeless. And sometimes the only way through something is to go through it. We've all heard that, but some things are just worth repeating, right? We can't always go around the difficult part. We can't always skip over the uncertainty or the grief or the fear or the change or the period when we don't yet know if everything is going to be okay and work out on the other side. But we can be very careful about the story that we tell ourselves while we're moving through it. Okay? A challenging transit, it's not a sentence. It's not forever. It's not a guarantee that something terrible is going to happen. And even when that your lived experience of a transit is difficult, that doesn't mean that the story ends right there in the most difficult part. And this is especially important with the astrology we're looking at now because Pluto can bring us into very deep psychological territory. Chiron is touching the wound at the same time. Neptune retrograde can make us question what we believe, what we wanted in the first place, what we thought our future was going to look like, and Uranus brings us changes that we didn't necessarily plan for. But Jupiter Cazimi is almost here, is also here. And I think that matters. I really do. Because Jupiter reminds us that there still may be something beyond what we currently see. There may be another opportunity, another perspective, another solution, a different person, a different path, or just simply another version of ourselves that we haven't even met yet. And that trine to Neptune retrograde can help us reconnect with faith, not necessarily blind faith, not the belief that everything is just going to magically be okay and, la da da, right? But the faith that this moment is not the entirety of our lives, right? You can be afraid and still move forward, right? You can be disappointed in something and still open yourself up to other possibilities, right? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can acknowledge that something hurts you without deciding that you're always going to feel that way and that things are always never going to change, right? You can be realistic about what's happening and still leave some room for hope. And sometimes a positive mindset is just kind of standing in front of the mirror and telling yourself that everything is okay, even when it's clearly not. But I could tell you, I do that all the time. It's like, it's okay. It's okay. You know? Optimism, very powerful. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know how this is going to work out yet. I don't, but I'm not going to assume that I can't do it. I'm not. And really kind of giving it over to God when you feel really stuck. Because sometimes the energy is just saying, look, this is difficult, but I'll deal with it. And I'm just going to deal with whatever is in front of me today. And sometimes it's recognizing that you've survived things before that you once didn't think you were ever going to get through. Remind yourself of that. And sometimes hope is simply refusing to make a permanent conclusion about your future based on your current circumstances. So as we go through the rising signs, I want you to listen for what resonates with you, but I don't want you to listen from a place of fear. Please. Astrology's whole job should just give you greater awareness. That's what it's all about, right? You guys who've been watching me for a while know I'm all about to be forewarned is to be forearmed. It should just help you recognize patterns and possibilities and timing and choices. It should never make you feel powerless, okay? You may not be able to control every little thing that happens around you, but you can continue to work with what you have, make the best decisions with the information available to you, and ask for help when you need it. And just stay open to the possibility that something you can't see yet is still developing. And the only way through, like I said before, the only way to get past it is to go through it. And you don't have to decide right now while you're standing in the middle of a chapter that you already, you know, maybe have deemed like something that has a negative ending. Don't make any big decisions like that. Okay, my friend. So that is what I have for you for the intro. I'm going to go into the rising signs and then I am going to have a final wrap up at the end. So I'll see you guys at your rising sign. Okay, Aries, so for you guys, this is hitting your fifth and 11th house axis, as I talked about in the longer video. You have Chiron in the second house, Uranus and Saturn are in your third house, and that Neptune retrograde in the first. So for you, major turning point involving your happiness, your creativity, children, romance, entrepreneurial pursuits, your right to create a life that actually makes you feel like your own, that it speaks to your authenticity. And with this Jupiter Cazimi in that space, this can bring a lot of illumination around, makes you feel happy. And that sounds simple, but for a lot of people, it's not, right? You might have spent years being responsible and meeting expectations and worrying about survival or doing what other people needed from you. And this astrology just makes you a lot more aware of the distance between the life that you're living and the life that you genuinely want to experience. And that fifth house is very connected to taking a personal risk as well. So this could, for many of you, involve a very creative project or a business idea, this desire for a new relationship or a child or performance, right? Fifth house is the house of the entertainer. It's a very passionate house as well. It's something that you just deeply want to manifest and bring into the world. Now, you may suddenly feel much clearer about what inspires you comparatively, right? Compared to like the past year or two, right? You're likely going to recognize that something that you once treated as like a hobby or a wish or a private desire actually carries a much greater meaning for you. But across from this, that Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, and that full moon energy, all moving through your 11th house of friendships, groups, communities, goals, and gains, very connected to your future, audiences, professional networks, your long-term dreams. So you might be realizing that you can't continue to shape your future around belonging to people or environments that no longer reflect who you are. It's really difficult for you to do it. So there might be a friendship or a group dynamic that's just become super complicated, or power dynamics in your most important relationships have become very obvious. You also may realize that you've been compromising your own individuality just to maintain acceptance, right? But you might remain committed to a group or a friendship or 11th house, your audience, or some sort of long-term goal because it once mattered so, so deeply to you, or you've been at it for so long, or with that person, right, that group for so long, even though you know in your heart of hearts that it no longer supports the person that you're becoming. Now, at the same time, Juno retrograde is involved. Juno is very connected to this idea of commitment. So it's going to bring all of your loyalties under review. So you're likely going to be asking yourself whether your current community genuinely supports your growth or whether it only feels comfortable when you remain predictable to them, right? And if you're not predictable, what kind of outcome, what kind of fallout is it? Now, with that square to Chiron in your second house, this is going to make money and security and second house things, confidence and self-worth part of the story. So you may want to take a creative or some sort of entrepreneurial risk, but you might worry whether you could afford it. Is it worth it? What's it going to look like on the other side? You want this greater happiness for yourself. But at the same time, you're probably going to feel guilty about prioritizing yourself at the same time. So you're likely going to like measure the value of that dream entirely by whether it produces immediate income, right? Because it's very connected to the second house of the money that you make from the work that you do. So it's like, is that dream worth it? Looking at the financial aspect of it, or looking at the aspect that brings you recognition or approval, right? Any of those, all of those things, or any one of those things. Now, Chiron can show you how quickly you abandon your own desire when it touches this fear surrounding survival, where it's like, oh, okay, I'm not going to make enough money. I'm not going to do it like that. But it's going to like linger in you. You're not going to be able to shake it, right? Now, Uranus and Saturn in your third house can bring a breakthrough through communication or writing, teaching, anything in that Geminian energy, learning, siblings, social media, technology, or just a new way of thinking. A conversation can totally change your direction. You could even receive some sort of unexpected information. You might begin expressing yourself in a way that feels a lot more honest, independent, intellectually alive. Now, Sedna can also show you where being dismissed or misunderstood or betrayed or silenced in the past has affected your confidence in your own voice and your own ability just to take something and attack it, right? In that typical Aryan way. Now, Neptune retrograde in that first house also makes this very deeply personal because you're reevaluating who you are. You're reevaluating your identity, right? Like that person that you believed yourself to be is changing. It's changing this year. And this is a very powerful piece of the story, the end of the month, right? An old image or role or self concept may just be dissolving, right? And that can feel both, kind of liberating and freeing, but also kind of disorienting, right? Because you're going to be thinking about who you are when you're not performing for other people. I mentioned that in the other video, like who are you when you stop defining yourself through struggle? What parts of yourself are real and authentic, and what parts have been created to gain approval or just to avoid conflict? Or to just have access to survival, right? Now, Neptune retrograde in the first can make you more sensitive and intuitive and imaginative and spiritual. Could also make you a lot more receptive, which is nice. But this can show where your boundaries have been unclear in all those areas. So, maybe you've been absorbed, right, by what other people expect from you, emotions or projections so completely that it's become really hard to tell your vision from the vision of like a partner or of a boss or a family member. Where do you end and they begin, that kind of thing, right? But you're going to be realizing these things, right? And the trine from that Neptune retrograde to Jupiter's Cazimi can help you reconnect with creativity and inspiration, all those Leonine things, confidence, joy, just a more soulful sense of yourself. And something that makes you happy is also going to remind you of who you are. It's going to help you remember who you are. So that could come through your children, it could come through your business, it could come through a creative project, a romantic connection, a connection with a child. It doesn't even need to be your own, some sort of personal passion, or just a willingness to play again, right? Can be part of your identity because you haven't been playing enough. I'm not suggesting that you don't go out and you don't try to do these things and have a good time, but having had Chiron retrograde in your sign for 7 years, that whole like just being able to let go and let loose and in a responsible, healthy way, it's been a little tricky. So this can be beautiful astrology for anything creative, and I don't care what it is, storytelling, performance, art, whatever it is. Especially anything that would make you more visible. It would be a very nice energy if you're into doing anything like that. But this Neptune is asking you to be honest about the difference between inspiration and escape. There's a difference, right? You do not use a romantic fantasy or a creative dream or a future possibility to avoid dealing with your present reality. Now, at the same time, don't dismiss a meaningful dream simply because you can't fully explain it yet, or it's not fully guaranteed. It's still your dream right now. So you don't want to diminish it, even if you're not able to do it right now. There's a lot of value in the identification of it, right? Now, you want to pay attention to what makes you feel more alive, but don't confuse impulsivity with courage, right? You don't have to destroy your security just to follow your heart, right? And I feel like I have to say that because I work with a lot of people where it's like, I just quit my job. I left my marriage. And look, some transits are like that. You don't want to do anything like that, right? Not in this energy, right? You don't have to destroy what you know to be true right now just to go after something that you want. But you may need to stop allowing fear about security to automatically veto every possibility for your happiness, right? And you being able to go after it, right? Because you're being asked to reconsider kind of like who gets a vote in the future that you're creating and whether you're finally ready to become the person that you've been imagining yourself to be. So that is what I have for you. I hope this was helpful in some way. Thanks for hanging with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye. Hey, Taurus Rising. So, as a reminder for you guys, it's on the fourth house, 10th house axis. You have Chiron in the first, Uranus and Saturn in the second. That Neptune retrograde we've been talking about is in your 12th house. So for you, this is deeply personal because the full moon is activating the foundation of your life and the direction that your life is taking. Now, that Jupiter Cazimi in your fourth house can really light up something connected to home, family, property, your emotional foundation, your emotional security, your parents, your history, even your private life, right? But psychologically, that fourth house, it goes much deeper than that, right? Because the fourth house is the deepest house in the chart. It does represent the part of you that exists when nobody is watching, right? It is that inner base of operations. It's that emotional environment that you carry, that we all carry within ourselves. So you may be asking whether the life that you've built externally actually supports you internally still. At this point, where a home or a family situation may reach a very important turning point, you may consider a move. Some of you may consider a move or making some sort of change to your property, or it could be also represent a family expansion or some sort of living arrangement or a renovation, right, of your actual property, if I said that already, or just a change in the way that you define and consider home. But the deeper question here may be whether your private life goes deep enough for you when it comes to the idea of safety. Does it give you what you need? Does it give you the peace and the warmth and that emotional room to grow? Now, across from this, across in the sky, this Pluto's retrograde, Juno's retrograde, the full moon in your 10th, this brings this culmination of profound realizations involving your career, public identity, reputation, your standing in the world, responsibilities, anything connected to leadership or this long-term direction of your life, right? It doesn't only have to be your career, right? It could just be like the long-term, your long-term plans in your life. Now, you may have reached a point where this old definition of success, where it doesn't work for you anymore, you know? Maybe you've spent years trying to prove yourself, or maybe your identity's become very tied to what it is that you do, right? You know, whatever it is, being productive or being dependable or accomplishing something or respected or being needed, right? Maybe your public life has required you to quell and just sort of suppress your own private needs. But you may now recognize that achievement and reaching these things without emotional stability is just, it's not enough. And this Pluto retrograde can show these deeper motivations underneath your ambition. So you might now realize that some of your professional drive came from fear or family expectations or a need for control or the desire to prove that you were worthy. You know, now, if it doesn't have to do with a career, maybe that idea that you had for your future, right? Those long, very long-term goals. Now, Juno retrograde can bring career agreements, but it could also bring any kind of agreement that's very connected to your long-term strategy or long-term goal. So yes, it can be professional commitment, anything connected with a public role, you know, anything like that, or expectations from some authority figure. It could bring things under review with people like that, but it could also just bring, you know, where you're going from this point for your long-term goals under review. So you might be asking whether the position that you occupy in your career still reflects who you are. Because it's sitting opposite the fourth house is where you're living, still reflecting who you are, right? And that square to Chiron in your first house makes this so personal because you're changing, your identity is changing. And when you change, the structures built around that old version of yourself can become really uncomfortable, right? Like I always say, it's like wearing shoes that suddenly become 3 sizes too small, right? Now, there may be for some of you a vulnerability about getting older. Others of you, you may be feeling really vulnerable about your appearance or your health or your confidence or just the simple question of who you're becoming right now, right? You might just feel like life is asking you to step into a new identity and you just don't feel fully ready for that yet because you don't have all the answers. You don't have all the pieces to the puzzle, right? And Uranus and Saturn in that second house can bring changes in your money and your income and resources and your sense of self-worth and your talents and just your whole understanding of personal security. So you may be learning that security can't be based entirely on predictability because life itself is changing for you. So for a lot of you, an income source may evolve. Others of you, a new talent can become financially useful, like some sort of the hobby or talent becomes monetized, right? You could do that. Or you may also confront a deeper fear of instability or recognize where past financial disappointment has made you very reluctant to trust any kind of new opportunity. Now, Neptune retrograde in that 12th house is adding a very deep spiritual, psychological, very private dimension. So you may be processing something that other people know nothing about. Old grief can rise to the surface, memories, disappointments, dreams, things that you've sacrificed in your life, fears that you still have that you never fully put to rest. Any kind of unconscious patterns can return, and not to torture you, but it's not, I promise. Right? It's just for a deeper understanding. You know, Neptune in the 12th, it dissolves defenses. So you may become aware of feelings that you've kept buried because you needed to be functional and active and kind of doing the thing, right? Because you needed to. It was only what you knew, right? But here you might start recognizing where you've escaped into work or into responsibility or into fantasy or denial or caretaking rather than facing what it is that you truly feel. And because Neptune's retrograde, this can be a period of inner review where a dream that you once had comes back around to be at least reviewed again. For a lot of you, a family memory may take on a new meaning, or you may begin to better understand a parent or your childhood or the emotional atmosphere that shaped you. Now, the trine from Neptune retrograde to that Jupiter cazimi can support very deep emotional healing and help you build a much more compassionate relationship with your past. As there's a grace about it, as I said in the last video. It's a helpful kind of energy. It doesn't mean that it might not be a little melancholy, a little nostalgic, a little painful, but there's a grace about it. Now, this doesn't mean idealizing what happened or pretending that everything was acceptable that happened to you in your past. It's not about that. It means recognizing what you are ready to release so that the past doesn't continue to determine the emotional conditions of your future. Right? The fourth and the 12th houses together, these can be they're very deeply ancestral, right? As you know, the 12th house is when we're in utero, we're in our mother, because we're born in the first house. So the 12th house, we're in our mother's wombs, we're in the waters of life. So everything that's going on with our mother and all of that is very kind of washing over our DNA. The second house is actually a house for ancestral patterning as well. And then we go to that fourth house and then the eighth. But those are the very powerful houses for these things. So you can become a lot more cognizant of family patterns and inherited fears and emotional secrets or sacrifices that have moved quietly through generations, where you're realizing, oh man, my mother did that, my grandmother did that, my grandfather, whatever it is, and just realizing these things. And you could also feel called to create a home that's more spiritually nourishing, that's more peaceful and private and emotionally restorative for you, because the healing is happening. So you're unpacking over here, but then you're decompressing over here, right? So try not to make your identity in this space. You don't have to totally decide anything right now, okay? You don't. That energy is coming up. You don't have to do it right now, right? But your identity isn't dependent on a title or a role or relationship or any sort of external achievement, right? You really have to ask yourself right now what success means to you now, not 10 years ago, not according to your family, and not according to what looks impressive from the outside, right? You may be rebuilding your life from the inside out. That's very likely. And I say it like that because I don't know what's in your personal birth chart. And the foundation that you create now must support the person that you're becoming, not merely preserve the life that you've already outgrown, that you've outgrown, right? You could sense it. All right, my friends, so that is what I have for you. I hope that additional information was helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Hey, Gem Rising. So you guys have this axis lit up the 3rd and the 9th. We did discuss it in that longer video, but let's unpack this a little bit more because this is going to really very much change the way that you're thinking about your life, right? This Jupiter Cazimi in your 3rd house, it's bringing important conversations and realizations and messages and a decision, an idea, could bring a writing project, some sort of contract. For others, it could be a teaching opportunity or some sort of new understanding where your voice becomes a lot more important, right? You may finally say something that you've been really afraid to say, and you just kind of say it, right? You may understand something that you just couldn't previously articulate, which is a tough go for Gemini, right? But, in all fairness, Mercury's been retrograde, right? We know how it goes. But you're able to articulate things a little more easily at the end of the month. You might even receive some information that changes your perspective or gives you a clearer sense of direction just in general in your life, right? Now, that 3rd house is also connected very much so with the stories that you tell yourself or that we tell ourselves, right? This is the 3rd house. And so Jupiter Cazimi can really light up a thought pattern that has either expanded your life or limited it. So you can recognize how much power your internal language has over your confidence and your decisions, as well as your expectations. And now across the wheel, we have Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, and that full moon, all in the 9th house, which can just really change your beliefs and your worldview and your what you're going after in your education on a more mundane in a more mundane way because it's the house of higher education. Also, your spiritual understanding, publishing, teachings, any sort of legal matter, travel, and just your general sense of being. So you might be questioning beliefs that you once accepted without examination, some of the ideas that are governing your life, realizing that they're actually not even yours or that you developed them a really long time ago. Maybe it was because the way that your family thought, and it was the way you were raised, or the group that you hung out with, whatever it is, you're going to be recognizing the delineation between what it is that you believe in, like what thoughts are yours and what aren't, right? Again, it could have come from family, religion, education, some kind of authority figure. 9th house is also father energy, so it could have just been father energy or your culture or just some earlier version of yourself. Whatever it is, Pluto retrograde is going to be bringing a very real ideological and spiritual transformation for you. So you might discover that something you believed with absolute certainty was partly rooted in fear, if you're being really honest with yourself, or control, or rebellion, or just this need to belong, or maybe a combination of any of those things. Now, Juno retrograde can bring commitment to a belief system, right? Because Juno's all about commitments, to a belief system, to a teaching situation, to an institution, a course of study, some sort of legal agreement, or just some future plan. It's going to bring all of these things under review. Obviously, it's subjective, so it depends on your personal chart, but you're going to be asking whether that your current philosophy and where you are right now still supports your growth, because that 9th house is ruled by Jupiter. It's where Sagittarius naturally lives. It's all about growth and really asking those hard questions. And with that square to Chiron in the 12th, this is telling me that some of the most important stuff that's going to be rising to the surface for you to consider is coming from your unconscious, but not just willy-nilly unconscious. It's old grief, it's old fear, it's shame, it's self-sabotage, it's unresolved pain that can really influence the way that you interpret your current circumstances. It's such as random thoughts. These are very real coming from the 12th house. So you might think that you're responding only to what's happening now when part of your reaction is coming from something much older. And it's so important that we remember that. okay? Because that reaction that we have with that friend or that significant other or having to do with our future, whatever it is, really trying to identify where is this feeling, this uncomfortable feeling coming from? Or where is this desire coming from? Because it is coming from the 12th house. Now, Chiron in that 12th can show you where the wound is, that wound of feeling unseen, unsupported, abandoned. And Chiron, it's this is the wound of worth, right? We're realizing what relationship, what family situation, what did you go after in your career where you weren't made to feel like you were enough? The idea of not being worthy, of being unseen, abandoned, maybe, or just unable to explain what you were experiencing in the time. And now you're able to finally kind of put words to it, right? Now, Uranus and Saturn in that first house indicates that you're becoming a different person. Hello. Okay. That we've been talking about that. We know when Uranus transits your sign, you change, right? Your identity may be changing faster than other people realize, and maybe even faster than you fully understand yourself, where you just realize, like, I can recognize I literally cannot put up with A, B, and C anymore. Or that relationship, yeah, it's nice and everything, but like I'm not feeling the same. You know what I'm saying? Like things are going to be shifting within you. Now, you may feel a very real need for freedom and authenticity and reinvention and just a more independent way of moving through your world. Now, Sedna in there can bring up old experiences of betrayal and exile. I know that sounds very dramatic, but sometimes that's what it is, right? When you're like, if you're the black sheep of your family, or like if a lot of Gemini risings are, a lot of Gemini risings and Gemini suns are. That's just astrological research. It is, but all of those emotions that brings, right? The feeling of powerlessness, right? And in that first house, though, this marks a process of reclaiming your personal authority by recognizing, like, wow, A, B, and C happen, and it's really always been very painful, but actually gaining authority and agency over that, saying, wow, that was just so not you. Or, recognizing and then just trying to reevaluate your sense of worth from there. Now, Neptune retrograde in that 11th is asking you to reconsider, especially the next 10 to 15 years of your life, right? Your dreams, your friendships, your goals and gains, your audience, if you have like a channel, your community, your network, or just a general vision for your future, right? Because that dream that you once had is likely changing. That network or friendship group or whatever, your those close connections may not be what you thought it was. They're not who you thought they were, and that group connection is not. It's just not what you thought it was. So you can become a lot more aware of where you projected hope and meaning or idealism onto a group, your tribe, your community that could actually provide you what you needed, right? But you're going to be realizing, whoa, I projected something onto these people that may actually not even be there in the first place. Why am I doing that? Because Chiron reminds us, especially in Aries and Taurus, right? Very connected to, the wound of self and and the wound of worth. And it could remind us that it wants us to focus, right? Wherever Chiron is, it wants us to focus on, do we feel worthy? And if we don't, what situations and or people made us feel that way? And then it's like the shade lifts, and it's like, oh, well, maybe I was like thinking there's more there than is actually there, right? But a lot of you are going to be connecting with a long-term idea that you once had, and you're reconnecting to it, right? Some sort of dream, some sort of idea that you wanted to accomplish at one point. But Neptune, again, being retrograde, this is not just simply about dreaming bigger. It's about really looking at the quality and the truthful reality of that dream or that thing that you want to go after, and really considering if the future that you are building right now, does it still belong to you? Do the people in your community or your network, do they get you? You know what I mean? Like, do they get you? Are they battery drains or are they battery chargers, right? Are you going after some sort of collective goal because it inspires you or because you're afraid to choose a path that's more personal, right? Are you going along to get along? Are you just kind of going with the flow? Now, with that trine from that Neptune retrograde to Jupiter Cazimi, this can bring inspired communication, creative writing, teaching, spiritual conversations, compassionate dialogue, media work, the ability to express a vision that truly resonates with other people. So you can have this really good idea that's going to reach a larger audience, or you'll be able to say things in a way that other people are thinking, but that they're not able to articulate it, and you articulate it correctly. This could be a friendship or a professional contract can inspire some sort of important project that you're involved in. But you might even be called to teach or write or speak or counsel or communicate, but from a more intuitive and a more compassionate place. Not that you wouldn't come from that place, but it's even more so. But Neptune does require discernment, so you want to be careful about any kind of vague, anything that's vague, any sort of vague offers, any vague promises, unclear group dynamics, any kind of idealized friendships, or just assuming that everyone shares the same intentions as you. This trying to supportive, yes, yes, but clarity is necessary, right? So stay curious. Don't force every single answer immediately. Sometimes psychological freedom starts when you're finally willing to question an answer that you once thought was permanent, right? For a lot of you, that's going to be going on the end of July. And your voice is just part of the liberation, and that future is going to start changing when you're willing, like really willing to speak honestly about what you now genuinely believe is possible, right? So that's what I have for you, some extra messages for you guys, Gemini. I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Hey, Cancer Rising. So for you guys, very strong financial and psychological configuration, because this is dancing between your second house and eighth house, and it's activating the axis of your money, other people's money, your sense of self, and emotional entanglements in that eighth house. So this Jupiter Cazimi first in that second house, it's really lighting up the area around money, income, your resources. Second house is also your talents, your self-worth, your values, and what you're capable of creating for yourself. Now, there's likely going to be an opportunity for growth, but more importantly, there's probably going to be this shift that's happening within you regarding how you value yourself. So you may begin recognizing that you've been underestimating a talent or a service or a skill or something that you contribute. You're likely going to see things a lot more clearly around where you've accepted less because you didn't trust, like really trust your own value. Now, Jupiter here can expand income, but it could also expand awareness. Okay. Now, the important realization may be that greater financial security begins with a different understanding of what it is that you deserve in the first place, right? What are you able to create? What are you willing to ask for? There's got to be willingness there, right? But across from that, we have the Pluto and Juno retrograde and the full moon all happening in the eighth house. And this can bring deeply buried issues involving shared money, debt, taxes, inheritance, investments, insurance, insurance payouts, settlements. But through a different lens, it's intimacy, it's sex and intimacy, dependency, trust, power. The eighth house is big basement. Emotional entanglements, like I mentioned before, but all these things coming up to the surface. So this can really show you where financial and emotional power have kind of become confused, right? Where they've become interwound, right? Where you're like, okay, like who has the control? Who owes who what? Who depends on whom? What unspoken agreement exists within this relationship. Now, it could be an intimate relationship. It could be a family relationship. It could be a business relationship as well. But that Pluto retrograde can show and just bring to the surface and expose resentment and fear and secrecy and dependency or any kind of power imbalance that's been operating underneath the surface. And that Juno is very connected to our ability to commit to things. So this Juno retrograde can bring like either a financial, a marital, or a business, or even some sort of emotional agreement under review. Something needs to be gone over. So maybe renegotiating what's shared between you and someone else, what's owed, what's fair, what does support truly mean? Now, with the square to Chiron in your 11th, that can connect this fear to a fear about your future. Maybe a dream hasn't unfolded the way that you expected, right? Maybe you didn't get the job or the project didn't work out the way that you had imagined. Or maybe you just feel unsupported by friends or your community or a network or an audience or some organization that you're involved with. Or you might even be questioning whether the future that you once were focusing on, you're wondering if it's even still possible. Now, Chiron can show this wound, especially around belonging, because it's in Taurus. So you may feel that you've helped other people advance themselves while your own goals remained delayed and or put on the back shelf. Some of you may feel that, or you may be especially sensitive right now to rejection or exclusion or the feelings that others don't recognize what you have to offer, and that could be very frustrating. Now, Uranus and Sedna in your 12th house can bring sudden unconscious material to the surface, right? And it's in a Mercury ruled space. So dreams and memories, intuitive realizations, private fears, long buried emotional material can kind of rise to the surface. And again, none of this is to torture you, it's so that you can unpack it. So you may finally and suddenly understand why you've repeated a financial and or a relational pattern. And it could be to intimate relationships, it could be to friendships, it could be within the workspace. And Sedna shows where betrayal and abandonment or powerlessness has affected your ability to trust any support. And that's going to become very real. And that could be from anyone in your life. It could be from a family member, a parent, a friend, an old relationship. Now, that Neptune retrograde in the 10th brings career, reputation, purpose, visibility, your long-term direction, brings that right into the story. So a lot of you are going to be rethinking what you want to be known for. That professional dream may be changing. Those long-term goals may be changing. You might even realize that a career path that you once kind of really idealized, right? You thought, no, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going after. It's just no longer feeling meaningful. And it could be for a boatload of reasons, but it's just not feeling the same. Or you may also reconnect with a calling that involves something more creative and healing and spiritual and compassionate. Could have to do with teaching or service or imagination or just helping others in some way. But because this Neptune is retrograde, career uncertainty is likely going to be part of the process. So just be patient. You may not have a perfectly defined answer yet, particularly by the end of July, but you probably will become more aware of what no longer fits. And that's very valuable as well. So you can also just kind of see where you've projected too much hope onto a job or a title or an employer or a leader or some sort of public opportunity. Now, that trine from Neptune retrograde to Jupiter Cazimi can help you to recognize that your talents may have a much greater value than you've been giving them, right? You're not giving yourself enough credit. Is it something intuitive or altruistic or spiritual, compassionate, or difficult to quantify that may have genuine financial potential that you haven't been paying enough attention to that you possess? So you may find a way to connect your income more closely with your purpose. A career opportunity may come up through a talent that you either previously overlooked or that you were downplaying in some way. So a lot of you can also receive very clear guidance about the direction that you want to pursue. But Neptune can blur professional expectations. So be careful with unclear offers or any sort of vague payment arrangements. promises without structure, or assuming that good intentions are enough. Be super careful. This is not you being a pain in the neck asking 50 questions, but you want to make sure all of those important questions are asked. Because there's this framework that's going to be required, okay? So, and you want to be able to distinguish between, like, especially towards the end of the month, between support and dependency. You want to be able to distinguish the difference between them. Receiving help is not a weakness, Cancer, it's not. But giving another person complete psychological control because you need their support can become deeply complicated. It really can. So, this astrology is asking you to remember your own value because your financial life may need restructuring. But the deeper transformation is about reclaiming your sense of personal power in a more honest way. Because you're being asked to not only, you know, like what you do and how it is that you earn, but even taking it more than that, what kind of life and purpose your income is meant to support. So it's not only thinking about that narrow lane of your work, but and how does that connect to everything else that's going on in your life, right? So those are the extra messages that I have for you. I hope those were helpful for you, Cancer. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Hi, Leo Rising. So let's talk about this for you. This is happening on your first house, seventh house axis. And let's just go a little deeper. This is enormously personal for you. This Jupiter Cazimi is happening in your sign, and this is marking a major moment of expansion for you. It's marking a new period of confidence and visibility and personal reinvention and opportunity or clarity about who it is that you're becoming. So you may feel like you're ready for more at this point, and more, whatever it is, more freedom, more life, more recognition, more authenticity. You may become just much more aware of your potential, and you're not going to be able to silence it. This isn't about you getting all full of yourself. It's not about that, right? But you may feel called to take up more space, as I say, right? Or just become more visible, or stop apologizing for the size of your personality or your gifts or your ambitions or your desires. Now, Hygeia can bring attention to your body and health and vitality and image. It's just the way your physical well-being is connected with your ability to expand and just be more. And Vulcan is very strong. He adds strength, he adds willpower, he adds endurance in the sense that you've been forged through pressure, you know, where you know that you've been through it, right? But and so many realizations all at the same time, because it can also show you where you've relied on force for too long, that could be, and maybe you felt like you had to be that way. That's not to say that that's not it, right? You may be strong, but you don't have to fight every battle alone. You don't have to be stoic. You don't have to be that forceful energy. Even if you feel like, well, I had no choice, it had to be like that. Okay, okay. But the energy's starting to change. So you want to just recognize this, right? Because across from you, we have the Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, and the full moon in your seventh house of marriage, relationships, partnerships, bosses, clients, collaborators, your doctors, all your significant one-on-one connections. So as you expand, your relationships are going to have to change as well. And this doesn't automatically mean that relationships are ending. It doesn't. Relationships built around that old version of you may need to be renegotiated here, because you're going to be recognizing power imbalance. Maybe it's where you felt like you had to carry too much of everything for too long, or you felt like you didn't have enough, right? You might realize how much of yourself that you've compromised just to stay in something, maintain that seventh house connection. Or another person may be undergoing a transformation that forces you to reconsider the nature of your connection. That could be to vice versa kind of thing, because first house, seventh house is the house of mirrors, so it could always be vice versa. But that Pluto retrograde can also expose control and jealousy and fear and dependency, manipulation, or unspoken emotional power within a relationship. Now, Juno retrograde is asking whether the agreements within your relationships are still working. So that's in your private relationships, but it's also with the boss, bosses, your clients, whatever it is, that may be reviewing going on here, where you're reviewing promises made or commitments or expectations or boundaries or roles being played, right? Or healthy roles being played, or just the balance between individuality and partnership. Now, that square to Chiron in your 10th house can bring vulnerability around your future, around your career and your reputation and your achievements and your authority, your visibility, just your general place in the world. So you might be asking whether becoming more fully yourself could cost you something professionally or even publicly, right? You could just be more mindful and actually fear criticism in this energy. Or you might fear that greater visibility is going to expose some kind of insecurity, or you might feel some pressure to prove yourself before allowing yourself to move forward. Now, Chiron in that 10th can reveal an old wound connected with recognition and authority figures and failure and public judgment, or feeling that your efforts were not fully acknowledged. So, Uranus and Sedna in that 11th house can dramatically change your future goals, right? Friendships, communities, audience, or just even your professional networks. You can outgrow a group, you can outgrow your community. But it's like, not in isolation. Like, if you outgrow a group, another group is coming right back in. So your audience may change, your community may change. You may develop a completely different long-term goal. Now, Sedna can show you where you have felt betrayed or left out or abandoned by friends or community, but it can also help you reclaim your power by choosing connections that better reflect who you are now. And that Neptune retrograde in the ninth house is bringing a lot of belief and faith and spirituality. What else is the ninth house? Education, publishing, marketing, advertising, travel, law, the overall vision of your life, right? All of that is being brought into this process. So you may just be re-examining what it is that you actually believe now. What were you taught to believe? Not what your family believes or your partner, or even what you believed in once upon a time, right? You're recognizing this as a spiritual path, this philosophy, this educational goal, just this vision for your future is needing to be reconsidered. Now, you might discover that something you once believed was partly just an element of idealization, or maybe it was based on fear or hope or someone else's authority. You might also reconnect with a deeper sense of faith after a long period of doubt or disappointment, just kind of reconnecting again, But because Neptune is retrograde, truth can come through, or it will come through in a reflection rather than through anything external, any kind of external certainty, an external person. So you might feel called to go within, to study, to teach, to write, to publish, maybe go on a trip, travel, just go after something that gives your life greater meaning. And that's so subjective, but you're going to be feeling it. Now, that trine from Neptune retrograde to Jupiter Cazimi can give you the courage to become more aligned with your own truths. Your identity and your beliefs are all working together here. So you're starting to understand yourself differently, but you're also starting to understand life differently. So very powerful for spiritual leadership, for teaching, for, again, writing, publishing, creative education, travel, philosophy, just sharing messages with other people. You may feel very inspired to become more visible because you now get it. You now understand what you stand for, right? Wanting to go after something. But Neptune really needs you to exercise discernment. So do be careful about believing that a new direction or a teacher or a belief system or some distant opportunity will solve every problem. The goal is not to replace one idealized identity with another. The goal is to become more honest about who you are and what gives your life meaning, right? Now, your advice here I would give you is just let yourself grow. without immediately assuming that your growth is a threat to everyone that you love. Healthy relationships can evolve, but relationships that depend upon you remaining smaller may become much more difficult to keep going. So you're not just deciding who you want next to you, who you want to walk along the path of your life with. You're actually deciding who you are and what you believe and what kind of life you are now prepared to represent. And these can replace, you know, um, these old ideas, these old ideologies that you've been working with, up to now. Okay, my friend, so that is what I have for you. I hope this was helpful in some way. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye. Virgo rising, for you guys having that Leo energy in your 12th house and that 6th house Aquarius, this is going to feel very internal for you. Okay, so I'm going to try to go a little deeper than I did in the video, the general video that I did for the end of the month. But this Jupiter Kazemi in that 12th house can bring significant spiritual and psychological insight for you guys. So something hidden is going to become a lot more visible to you. You're going to be just very, very intuitive. You're probably going to recognize a pattern or, again, some sort of fear. Grief at some point in your life. Again, it could be recent, it could be from a long time ago, a habit, or just some sort of unconscious belief that's quietly influenced you for so many years now. And that 12th house is telling you need to rest, you need to retreat. You need closure. You need forgiveness. You need healing. You have to let something go, Virgo. There's something that you've been carrying privately. It's going to be something different for each of you. Again, these are general readings. There's something that you've been carrying privately that other people just don't get. They don't fully know. They don't fully understand. Even if they say they do, well intended and all that, they don't understand. You may be functioning and working and doing your Virgo thing. You're helping people. You're handling the thing. You're doing the thing, right? Well, a much deeper emotional or psychological process has been taking place underneath the surface. Now, Jupiter Kazemi can light up that inner process where you finally understand why this pattern has continued, why it's been hard for you to get in front of. And where you realize a big part of the reason why you haven't been able to get in front of it is because there's something about it that you've been avoiding. Right. And so, in all of this, you're going to see something that you thought was a weakness, but it was actually, and it is, a survival response. You recognizing, like, I had to do it that way, recognizing that that's how you feel. Now, across from this is that Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde in the full moon in your 6th house. And this can bring changes, right? As we discuss, involving work and health and your routines and your responsibilities and your coworkers, your employees, your obligations, and just the way that you manage your everyday life. But a lot of you are going to be recognizing that whatever routine that you've been very committed to, it's just no longer sustainable for you. So, but you've become so accustomed to this functioning under pressure that you just no longer recognize how much pressure you're actually carrying and how squeezed in you feel. And this doesn't mean that you don't recognize you have a lot on your plate, but it goes deeper than that. And while you may be very capable, that's great because you're Virgo, of course. You know my spiel about Virgo. You guys are the most capable out of all the zodiac. But capability can become a trap, and I kind of touched on this in the video for the end of July, where other people just assume that you can handle more than you usually can or really want to, right? And you guys know, those of you who've been watching me for a while, I always give this example with Virgo, where Virgo is the one sign where people are like, "Oh, hi Virgo, how you doing?" And they don't wait for an answer because they assume you always have your act together. You're always going to figure it out somehow, right? And this is going to be, you're going to become very mindful of this. Here you may also assume that you should just be able to handle more, right? You should be able to handle everything that they want you to, just because you've handled so much before, because you've always handled so much. You've always had the big plate, a bigger plate than everybody else, or at least maybe the same size plate. It just seemed like your stuff was heavier, or you had more intention, right? But this astrology can show that endurance is not the same thing as well-being. And that's going to be a big lesson for you guys the end of this month. And now Juno retrograde in the sixth house can bring work agreements, it can bring responsibilities, and these unspoken commitments under review. When I say unspoken in the what we're talking about here in the sixth house can be anything. It can be anything connected to work. It can, because it is the house of responsibility. So are you the one always showing up for your kids or your significant other, or you doing the thing at work, whatever it is? Like they just always know that you're going to have it, right? But suddenly you're going to realize, like, oh man, I have like other things going on that I need to focus on here. So you're going to be stepping back and being like, am I still actually responsible for all of this? Did I consciously agree to this, or did I kind of just become the person who just always handles the stuff, right? Is this routine, this daily routine supporting my life, or is my entire life being organized around maintaining this routine for everyone else? Now, Hygeia makes the health, because the sixth house is the house of health. Hygeia makes the health dimension especially important, and this is where you guys live, obviously, right in that sixth house. So your body may be communicating something that your conscious mind has been trying to override. This doesn't mean that you need to be scared about a health situation. It doesn't, okay? But it does mean that you are likely going to need to become a lot more honest about what your body, mind, and nervous system require and the relationship between all of them. Very important. Right. And I talked about this in the other video, how pay attention to like lower back aches, the shoulder, or the hip aches. That's holding stuff from the past, right? So if you're holding a lot of stiffness and, the structural part of your joints here, in your shoulders, if those are very kind of like stiff, what do you need to let go of here, right? And this square to Chiron in your ninth house can really challenge your just general beliefs about what you're supposed to be doing. I mean, it could be ninth house, it could be challenging your beliefs. It could be a challenge that you're going through with father energy, because the ninth house, Chiron is wound, ninth house is father energy. So there could be some sort of health issue going on with dad. It can be that, but it can just be a situation again of your faith, of your beliefs, of your philosophy, or your sense of meaning. And maybe it's a little bit of everything. Maybe you're having a struggle with your father's health. If that's the case, I will light a candle. Honestly, I mean, I light candles for my community anyway. But I will certainly light a candle. Please let me know what you might be struggling with. Because I think our energy, sharing our energy and praying for each other is very helpful. But you're likely going to be questioning at the end of the month why something is happening. There could be this general, you know, wonder about the future, right? Where you may have believed that if you worked hard enough and you behaved responsibly enough, or you did everything correctly, that life would eventually become more predictable for you, that it would eventually become something more aligned with what you were feeling. But Chiron can show this pain of realizing that life doesn't always work according to that formula. It just doesn't. And with Uranus and Saturn in the 10th house, this can bring unexpected changes in your career, your reputation, your public identity, your long-term direction. Uranus and Saturn in that 10th house is mother energy as well. So keep that in mind. There can be some sort of you just want to check in on mom, right, with Uranus in the 10th house. But you also may be reconsidering the path that you've been following, or recognizing that your professional identity just no longer fully represents who you are. Like, I just get this such a strong feeling of such a very strong desire for change, right? And with this Neptune retrograde in your eighth house, this takes you into even deeper emotional territory, because this brings review, right? Because it's retrograde. But it's going to be a review of eighth house things. So trust and intimacy and shared finances and dependency and emotional entanglements, inheritance, psychological bonds that you form with other people. So lots of processing. And you're likely going to be processing feelings that you haven't been able to name and just reevaluating where you've idealized someone or rescued someone or dependent upon someone or became emotionally responsible for someone else's healing. And with this trine from Neptune retrograde to Jupiter's Cazimi, this can help you access compassion and grace and forgiveness. But it's not necessarily about excusing harmful behavior or behavior that's inappropriate or irresponsible. It's not about that. It's about freeing yourself from the need to carry the emotional weight of something forever. And in that eighth house, it's any past pain, that relationship where the person wasn't faithful, or the divorce that happened, or the passing away of somebody. It's the house of death, life and death. The inheritance snafu thing with the family member who ended up being crooked, or whatever it is, you know. This could also be super powerful for therapy. So good for therapy. Any kind of spiritual work, grief work, private healing, understanding patterns that have passed through families or relationships, recognizing, right, like what you do because it's like what your family has always done. A lot of these things can be rising to the surface right now. But the key here is to not treat rest and the idea of just chilling out for a minute and just decompressing as something that you have to earn after you've completely exhausted yourself. Right? It's like I'm only allowed to rest after I've done everything, after I'm exhausted, after, yeah. Pay attention to these patterns and pay attention to your body and to the responsibilities that you continue to carry simply because you've always carried them. You don't need to fix everything immediately. You may simply need to just become a little more honest about just what's no longer working in your life, right? Your life may not need more discipline. Maybe you just need like a different structure that should involve a little more rest, like real rest, right? Real rest, where if you're not working, that you give yourself permission to actually just straight up just enjoy something. Throw yourself into it. Allow yourself to take a nap if you're able to and not feel guilty about it, because that's going to be kind of part of the medicine for you for the end of the month. So, Virgo, I hope that was helpful in some way. Thank you for trusting me with your energy, and I will see you guys next time. Bye bye. Libra Rising. So, for you guys, like I mentioned in the last video, 11th house, 5th house activation here. So for you guys, this astrology can bring a major shift in your future, 11th house, your relationships, friendships, and your willingness to emotionally invest in what it is that you really want. What do you really want for your future? Now, this Jupiter Cazimi in your 11th house can very much expand your dreams, or at least dreams is such like a hokey word, right? But what it is, especially what it is that you see yourself doing over like the next 10 to 15 years, it could also expand your friendships. Um, if you are um, if you have any social media, it could expand your audience, your community, your professional network, your social influence, or just your sense of what's possible, right? Because you could suddenly see a future for yourself that you couldn't imagine before, right? An opportunity can come through another person, a group, an audience, an organization, or something with a group that shares your interests. But more psychologically, this is about allowing yourself to believe that your future can still become larger than your past. And I feel like a lot of you are dealing with that right now, right? Not being able to recognize what is available for you moving forward, where you may have quietly reduced, shrunk your expectations because of a past disappointment or because of a current disappointment, because of that current relationship that you feel very small end. Even if it's not the person, maybe you just feel very restricted. Maybe you're just restricting yourself, whatever it is. You've likely convinced yourself that certain dreams were just unrealistic, they weren't attainable for you, or maybe they weren't necessary, they just were no longer available to you. Maybe you feel like, oh, I'm too old, I'm too this, I'm too that, whatever it is, right? But this Jupiter Kazemi is here to remind you that your future is not finished yet. It's not. So across from this energy is Pluto and Juno retrograde, that full moon in the fifth house. This could bring intense culmination involving all fifth house things. So children, creativity, romance, having your own business, pleasure, just happiness, personal expression. It's the house of the performer. What else it is? Is it? It's the house of vacations, and also taking chances. So something that you deeply, deeply care about requires transformation. Deeply. And when I say transformation, I mean like something needs to change in the way that you're handling it or the way something is playing out in real time. So for some of you, this could be a romance, maybe needs to become more serious. Um, and the energy is responding to that, where it becomes more serious, it becomes more psychologically revealing, it becomes a lot more complicated, or some sort of creative project that you're involved in can take on much greater emotional importance for you, or some, like I mentioned with the child, something involving a child is going to require a different approach. But you may also recognize that you've been putting off your happiness while waiting for the right time, or the right thing, the right circumstances, the right person, the right amount of money, the approval of others. You might be realizing that you've been waiting on your happiness to come through another person or an external situation outside of yourself. But Pluto in the fifth house can show you where joy has become so tangled with control. So you could be afraid here to care deeply because caring creates vulnerability, right? And so that can end up manifesting as you being afraid to take some sort of creative risk because you would feel like the failure would be too personal, that it would be a personal affront to you. And it's not always like that. It's not, you know? Or you might want love, but you're afraid of losing the power within the love. Or, you may want to fifth house is children. Maybe you're at home. Maybe you want to think about going back to work more, but you feel guilty because of your child, or you're working a lot. You're not spending enough time with your child. And so something needs to change there. But the Juno retrograde, Juno is very connected to the idea of commitment. So we can be committed to a lot of different things. It is to marriage and romantic agreements, yes, but it's also very connected to loyalties and our children and our job, our family, whatever it is that we're committed to. But Juno retrograde, as all retrogrades, this is going to bring all of those things under review. So you're likely going to be questioning whether a relationship allows you enough space for your individuality and future growth. And in that fifth house, you could be looking at your relationship, and you could also be looking at the dynamic and how things are set up, with your children or with your business, whatever it is. Now, this square to Chiron in your eighth house can show you where there are these fears involving trust and intimacy in other people's money, right? The idea of the shared finances, or dependency, or betrayal, or loss, or it's emotional vulnerability. So you might want this bigger future, but at the same time, you're afraid of what you would have to risk emotionally in order to create it. So you might have learned along the way that depending on people is dangerous, or that they're going to let you down. You may have learned that love can be very withdrawn, right? Where again, and you guys are very well known for going along to get along. You do not like confrontation. I'm talking about the archetype of Libra. Does not like confrontation. Doesn't like it. Doesn't mean that you're happy by putting the face on and doing whatever needs to be done in the moment. But you learned this. You learned to remain agreeable and emotionally composed because revealing your deeper needs felt unsafe. It feels unsafe. And so then we have this Uranus and Sedna energy in your ninth house, which can dramatically change just your whole perspective, right? That ninth house is very connected to worldview energy. Now, I do want to mention that ninth house is also father energy. Whenever Uranus is in father energy, there can be some sort of change in the dynamic that we have connected to father energy because it's with Sedna, and Sedna is very strict, right? So there might be like a little bit more tension between the connection between you and father energy, between you and a grandfather. It could certainly be that, or maybe you and an in-law as well, like a father-in-law, brother-in-law, or even a sister-in-law. Now, for a lot of you, travel, education, spirituality, publishing, teaching, these are all other ninth house things, legal matters, anything having to do with law, legalities, lawyers, legal matters, or exposure to new ideas can open a door for you, right? Where it's just like this whole other thing that you hadn't even thought of. So you could start questioning a philosophy or a belief system that once shaped your choices. So don't be surprised, if you're reassessing or reevaluating your religion or your politics or just your worldview. And with that Neptune retrograde in your seventh house, this makes relationships a very important part of this process. Ninth house is lawyers, seventh house is marriage. So some of you are like, are you thinking about the future? Is it possible to expand, or are you looking to maybe leave your marriage? These are all things that could come up. Now you may also be reconnecting with a more soulful idea of partnership. And is it possible within the one that you're in? One that's based not only on either attraction or obligation or a history, but on an emotional, more spiritual, more psychologically aligned one, right? Because this trine from Neptune to Jupiter Cazimi can bring so much compassion and romantic hope and creative partnership and these meaningful connections and the desire to have meaningful connections. But Neptune retrograde is asking you to see the person who is actually in front of you, Libra. You know what I'm saying? Like, who legit is your partner? And are they even capable of being that? Now, this is not to put a partner down at all because we're all amazing. We all are. We all bring amazing things to the table. But sometimes when we have a certain set of ideas or these desires, or we recognize finally what our soul is missing, is the person in front of us at least willing to work with us to try to achieve that together, letting them know that this is what you need and you would like, and if they could help you get to that place. But there's got to be like eyes wide open, right? You're not looking at the person that you imagined or the person that you would like them to be or the person that you think they have the potential to be or the relationship that you hoped you were building. Now, this doesn't mean that every relationship is deceptive in any way. It's not. It just means clarity and compassion have to work together, and your eyes are going to be extremely clear at the end of the month, right? So you don't want to assume that happiness is frivolous. Your happiness matters, you know? What you love matters, what you create matters, the future that you're imagining matters. So don't stay quiet about it, but just be mindful of who it is that you're dealing with, whether it's a significant other or maybe a business partner, whatever it is. You will need to confront the fear that comes with caring deeply about something because caring always creates vulnerability. And having that big conversation can feel very scary, especially if we're not sure if that person is capable of being that thing, right? But I do suspect you'll be surprised when you have that conversation, as the future may be asking you to risk being emotionally invested again, in a different way. but utilizing greater discernment than you have up to now, and more honesty and more openness. And a lot of you are just going to be like, why didn't I have this conversation sooner? Others of you are just going to be like, wow, this is really validating. This individual is such a good person, but we are just not at all on the same page, right? There could be that as well, right? So it's going to be something a little different for each of you, but that is what I have for you. I hope this was helpful in some way. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye. Hey, Scorpios. Oh, you guys have this 10th house, 4th house dance going on between Leo and Aquarius. So for you guys, this is a major, for many of you, career, family, relationship, identity turning point. That 10th house is career, but as I said in the other video, it could also be the status of your most important relationship, your very long-term plans. And with this Jupiter Cazimi in that 10th house, this is going to bring a lot of visibility, a lot of focus to your future, a lot of focus to your career, opportunity, recognition, this idea of expansion because it's Jupiter expanding your career, your leadership, or just a much clearer sense of your professional direction if you're still working, if you're not still working, much clearer picture about where it is that you're heading. So you may become more visible. You quite literally, you may take on a larger role. If you do, congratulations. You may finally receive recognition for something that you've worked super hard to build. Um, you may also become a lot more aware of your potential and the distance between what it is that you currently do and what you know that you're capable of achieving. And that that knowledge, to feel it in the core of your soul, is everything. Because then you're realizing in coming from a much more honest place what it is that you're actually capable of achieving. Now, this 10th house also does represent your public identity, like how people know you, right? So this Kazemi can really have you looking at this idea of what you want to be known for now. What kind of authority do you want to be? Are you going after something because it really matters to you, or just because achievements become tied to survival, approval, or just proving your worth in one way or another, right? And however it's rolling out from you. Now, across from this, we have the Pluto and Juno retrograde working with the full moon in your 4th house. Big changes could be coming in for you guys, having to do with home, family, property, parents, living arrangements, your past, and how it is that you like unpacking your past in a different way. I say that so quickly, but that's a deep one, right? Really unpacking your past, and just your emotional foundation, because something is happening privately, very privately for you that can affect what you can or want to do publicly, right? So a family situation can reach some sort of turning point, or you may need to confront a really deeply rooted pattern from your childhood, or recognize how your family shaped your ambitions, and perhaps even how your early environment shaped the way that you do family, the way that you parent, or the kind of spouse that you are or were if you're divorced. Or maybe you are learning that you had to achieve things in order to be considered valuable. Or maybe for some of you, success became a form of protection in some way, right? Because that 4th house is emotional stability. So, if you have success, then you could just bring your own emotional stability to yourself. But in that 4th house, it's not connected to anything that's external. It would be more internal. So maybe you became that strong person because you felt like you didn't have enough room to be vulnerable, right? For a lot of you have carried family responsibilities that affected your ability to go after what it is that you really wanted, whether that was because of a sick parent or because of children or whatever it is. And now this Pluto retrograde is exposing the emotional roots underneath that inner drive that you have. And that Juno retrograde can bring, Juno deals with all kinds of commitments. And in this 4th house, it's family agreements, or obligations or property arrangements or emotional loyalties. All of these things are going to be brought under review because, is retrograde. So you can see that you're still organizing your life around a role that you were given years ago. And that role can be one that makes you feel vulnerable, you know? Where you're strong on the outside because you have to be seen as strong, but you have this inner vulnerability going on. And with the square to Chiron in your seventh house, this can bring a lot of vulnerability through relationships or around relationships for sure. Now, a partner for a lot of you, some of you, a client, a spouse, a collaborator, or someone significant in your life may touch an old wound within you involving rejection, abandonment, betrayal, trust, or just not feeling seen, being sidelined in some way. And so you could fear that this other person is not going to support your growth, or they're not supporting your growth in the way that you actually need. They're not there for you in the way that you really need them to be. So you can worry that becoming more successful or visible will create conflict in the relationship, or having greater expectations of the relationship can ultimately cause a conflict in your connection. And you might also just become a lot more aware of where you've chosen relationships that repeat these early emotional patterns in your life, where you could see the repeated patterns. Now, Uranus and Sedna in your eighth house is your natural home. This can bring unexpected developments involving shared finances and intimacy, debt, inheritance. Um, did I say investments? Dependency, grief, uh, all kinds of psychological healing. Something hidden is going to be revealed. A financial arrangement needs to change. Now, the eighth house is also mortgages. So maybe you're selling your house because of all this activity going on in the fourth. So maybe you're selling your home, or you're selling your home, you're buying a new one where there's a, mortgage, or dealing with the banks or something like that. It could be that. Some of you might experience a breakthrough in your understanding, though, of if this can be very powerful for a lot of you, where you're going to recognize this breakthrough in the idea of trust and power and emotional attachment, especially with this Neptune retrograde in your sixth house, which is going to be bringing like your work and your health and routines and your responsibilities, your day-to-day responsibilities into this mix as well. So you might have sacrificed just too much of your energy to environments that drain you in your life, and you're realizing it now. Maybe you've sacrificed too much of your energy in that relationship or that connection, whatever it is, and now you just feel kind of spent. Maybe you drained from that work environment, whatever it is, you may need to be very careful about blurred boundaries in this space. So it could be blurred boundaries around work, around unclear expectations, around overgiving, assuming responsibility for problems that don't belong entirely to you. Okay. And because Neptune is in there, we do want to make sure that we, again, anything that's blurry, that's Neptunian and is very connected to like addiction, especially anything with liquids, so like alcohol, be super careful there that you don't maybe drink too much and, write a text or an email or make a phone call that you might be sorry you did. So just something to be mindful of, right? Now that trine from Jupiter retrograde to that Jupiter Cazimi can really help you though. This is very helpful for you for that to align your daily work, align your health with just like your work with a more professional vision, your health with a greater boundaries, right? Healthy diet, doing your exercise, cutting down on whatever it is that you're doing too much of. Because you can feel inspired in this energy to do work that's positive in that space. So helping, teaching, healing, creating, guiding, contributing something meaningful. But there's got to be a practical structure to whatever it is that you're creating here. But what I do like about this, it's like your day to day, I just feel like is naturally going to start to just feel a lot more structured, you know? And look, you're allowed to want success and be ambitious and be seen and be wanted, right? All of those things matter, obviously. But this is likely for most of you going to be a period when you redefine success so that it includes emotional peace and healthy routines and meaningful work and relationships that don't require you to abandon yourself. Okay, Scorpio. So that is what I have for you. I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye. Hey, Sagittarius Rising. So this little dance between Leo and Aquarius happening between your ninth house and your third house, very exalted energy for you because that ninth house is actually your home. So for you guys, this astrology can completely change the direction of your thinking and your life. So that's no small thing, right? Jupiter Kazemi is in that ninth house, which can bring expansion through ninth house things. So publishing, marketing, advertising, travel, anything with education, teaching, spirituality, legal matters, media. Did I say philosophy? Philosophy. Major shift in your perspective. Also, there could be an involvement in one way or another having to do with either foreign lands or people from foreign cultures, because it's that ninth house. So you can suddenly understand where you want to go next, right? Where you feel called toward a different future. And it just comes upon you where you're like, oh my gosh, everything, I see it now. So it could be, for some of you, a new educational path. For some of you, travel opportunities, some sort of teaching role, maybe a publishing project, a belief system, or just even a new spiritual understanding that becomes very, very important for you, right? You reconnect, or how do I want to say this? Because it's got to do with faith in your life. But I don't really want to say reconnection because you're also going to be looking at everything differently. But very connected to faith. Faith is going to become, you're going to become more mindful of your faith. And again, not the kind of faith that's like blind faith, but this renewed sense of that there is still more for you to experience, more for you to learn and contribute. Now, across from this, Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, and the full moon in your third house, this can bring very intense conversations, information, decisions, or changes involving siblings, relatives, extended family, neighbors. What else is third house? Writing, communication, technology, social media. Third house is also your local environment. So words have tremendous power for you right now. A conversation might reveal something that changes your perspective completely, or information comes in that forces you to reconsider a plan that you're actively working on. But you may need to express something that you've been holding in for a long time. Now, with Pluto retrograde in that third, this can reveal some sort of obsessive thought pattern or mental control or fear-based thinking or the power of the stories that you repeat to yourself. And it could be absolutely connected to a sibling, extended family, some sort of recognition in that way. It could even connect to like your old like schooling environment, old friends. But you might realize in all of this that your mind's been trying to protect you by constantly anticipating what could go wrong and even making excuses at the same time for other people, right? Now, with this Juno retrograde, this can bring communication agreements and intellectual compatibility within relationships under review because it's retrograde and Juno's connected to commitments. Okay, so you may ask whether you are actually being heard. Is your voice being heard? Or whether you can speak honestly. without being judged or without being punished or dismissed or misunderstood, right? Because there's something that's coming up there. And I do feel like for a lot of you, it's either connected to a sibling or extended family situation, but it can also deal with somebody that you might be in this contract with. I'm doing this because third house, ninth house, very connected to like contracts, lawyers, things like that. Now, the square to Chiron in your sixth house can connect this obviously to work, but also to health, routine, stress, or the feeling that your everyday responsibilities are preventing you from this bigger thing that you want to do. We could call it a larger vision, a dream, whatever it is that you want, right? Where these everyday day-to-day responsibilities or some sort of situation going on with your health is preventing something that you want to do. So you may know what you want, but wonder how to make it fit into your actual life right now. Now that it's not give you a license to go crazy worrying about your health or anything else, right? But it's just like something's going to have to be figured out here. Now you are likely going to be inspired by this larger possibility of something that you're going after, while at the same time feeling very trapped by your circumstances, be it your schedule, your health, your job, or just the needs of other people. That could be a thing as well. Now, Uranus and Sedna in that seventh house of contracts and partners and significant relationships and clients um, and doctors are also in the seventh house. This can bring some sort of unexpected development in relationship, partnership, or any of those dynamics. Other people can surprise you here. So a relationship may need more freedom or honesty or flexibility or renegotiation. Someone might introduce you to an entirely new way of thinking. You might also need to really look at and come face to face with where a past betrayal or abandonment has affected your willingness to trust people, especially new people. Okay? Because that'll be a real thing for you at the end of the month. And that Neptune retrograde in the fifth can reconnect you with creativity and romance and imagination and pleasure and spirituality in your inner child. So a creative dream is likely going to come back around or be realized. A romantic situation may need to be viewed a little bit more clearly. Your situation with your children might need to be viewed a little more clearly. You're likely going to recognize where you've idealized something, right? It could be love, it could be a creative project where you've sacrificed joy or you've abandoned your creative life because practical concerns took over, or where like that inner child, that inner joy, right? You just haven't been tapping into it the same way. Now, this trine from Neptune to Jupiter Cazimi can be so beautiful for creativity and artistic inspiration, but also for teaching and storytelling and spiritual study and travel and publishing, if you're actively doing anything like that. It's just following some sort of very creative, meaningful vision, right? But that Neptune retrograde is asking you whether your dream is grounded enough to be real. And that's a real question, right? You want to avoid, in this energy, you want to avoid thinking that you need the entire journey to be mapped out before taking the first step, that you need all the information. You want to really be mindful of not jumping to conclusions. Your worldview is changing. Your relationships are going to be changing with that, right? Obviously. And your daily life may eventually need change as well. But first, you may simply just need to first admit that you want something different and give your dream structure and give your creativity time and give your truth language. But all of this is coming from that third house where you have all this energy in there. And that Pluto is just really starting to do his thing. When Pluto first went into your third house, I said around 2 years ago, I was like, you gotta give it a couple of years to really start doing its thing because it's gotta get comfortable in there. He's in there for 20 years, right? We have 18 more years now. In that third house, right, of communications and the way where you think. So you're definitely you're changing, you're changing. And this is all good. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to your relationships, obviously, because they're going to be evolving with you if it's a healthy dynamic that you've got. But that is what I have for you, my friends. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye. Hi, Capricorn Rising. So for you guys, the dance is happening between the eighth house and the second house, between the Leo and Aquarius energy, and all the other stuff going on. Very powerful financial and emotional turning point for you. With that Jupiter Cazimi in the eighth, this can bring a lot of expansion and change or realizations around shared money, investments, inheritance, insurance payouts, debt, taxes, um, any kind of financial support that's coming from someone else, intimacy, trust, emotional healing as well. So for some of you, this can coincide with assistance, right? Getting financial assistance or funding. You're working on a project, it's getting funding or compensation or settlement or a partner's financial improvement or an opportunity to restructure debt or shared resources. But the eighth house is also deeply psychological. It's a very psychological component here because it's very connected to, like I said, trust and intimacy and vulnerability and dependency and fear and loss and grief and just power and transformation and all of these things within this connection. So Jupiter Cazimi can light up where support is available, yes, but it could also show the emotional beliefs that you've attached to receiving support. So even if like support is coming in, you might be really, I'm not going to say fussy, but like you're going to have to question how you receive the support. Are you being open? Are you feeling defensive? If you are, why? Right? Are you do you because you feel like needing something makes you feel weak? Really considering if you trust another person, okay, does that mean that you have to lose control? Because you guys like to have control. Can you receive without feeling indebted? And can you share power without surrendering yourself? You know, this is going to be very profound for the end of the month. And across from this, we have this Pluto and Juno retrograde plus the full moon in Aquarius in your second house. And this could just fundamentally change your relationship with money and income and self-worth and talents and resources and just this idea of personal security. So, you're likely going to be confronting the question of how much power you've given to money over your emotional life. And I know a lot of you are saying, well, it's because I needed to be like that. I had to. How am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to do this, that, whatever? Financial concerns may be very real, and they are obviously, right? But Pluto can show that deeper psychological story underneath them, right? Does money represent freedom for you? Does it represent safety, right? In that second house, having to do with safety and feeling stable and control and worthiness and independence, right? You know, just this idea of, you know, because you also at the same time, you have this energy of really not wanting to depend on anybody else right now. So what does this mean? That it does look like you are getting some sort of assistance. And with this Pluto retrograde, this can really expose like scarcity fears that have completely shaped your choices. And it could also show where someone else's money or their approval or their supports become very psychologically controlling for you. And you don't like that. And Jupiter retrograde is going to bring all of this under review, right? Financial agreements, contracts, commitments, shared obligations, all of it's coming into review with Juno retrograde in all of this. So you may need to renegotiate, like I mentioned in the other video, who pays for what, who contributes what does fairness look like in this relationship. And it's not only about money, by the way, because that eighth house is also like the blending of your lives and what matters, to who, what matters to who, right? And so it's like, okay, I do this, you do that. I pay for this, you pay for that, right? Whatever it is, that fairness, there's going to have to be a conversation here. Now, the square to Chiron to your fifth can touch on a wound involving a creative project, happiness, children, romance, fertility, entrepreneurship, or just your ability to enjoy life. So, a lot of you have become just so focused on survival that joy feels and happiness feels just irresponsible. You know, so you might want to start a business or a creative project, but you fear the financial risk, right? Well, I can't do that because if I don't make the money, then that's going to be irresponsible, right? Or some of you might struggle to invest in yourself because some part of you believes that pleasure has to be earned only after that practical problem has first been solved, right? These constant trade-offs. Now, Uranus and Sedna in your sixth can bring changes to that sixth house energy of work, employment, day-to-day routines. What else is it? Coworkers, your employees, your health, your daily schedule. So for a lot of you, a job or a routine can change unexpectedly or very quickly at the very least. So you may become aware that your current way of working just is not sustainable. Or Sedna can also bring this recognition about where you've been feeling really trapped and undervalued and overlooked or abandoned, especially within a work situation. And with that Neptune retrograde in the fourth, this brings like home, family, property, parents, like your first family, childhood, your whole emotional foundation into the mix, into the story. So for a lot of you are going to be reviewing your family beliefs about money. Or you might realize that some of your financial fears don't even begin with you. Like, right? Like, you weren't born like this. Maybe you never used to be afraid, having to do with money, and now you suddenly are. Or maybe money was an unpredictable thing in your childhood. Or maybe security depended on you pleasing somebody. Or maybe some of you learn that love and financial support always came with conditions. That's a big one, right? And the trine from Neptune retrograde to Jupiter Cazimi can support deep emotional healing and forgiveness and family healing and property matters and a more intuitive understanding of what genuine security means. But it could also show you where family expectations and guilt or even idealization have blurred financial boundaries. So, the smart thing to do here is like deal with financial reality directly without allowing fear to become your entire identity. So, you might need some sort of in order to make that happen, probably going to need some sort of new financial structure. And you might need some help. You might need to renegotiate an agreement, some sort of financial agreement, or create a different source of income, or you might need to just stop measuring your worth by what you currently have. And just know receiving support and having personal power are not mutually exclusive. Because real security isn't about having more. And we all know that, but sometimes we have to hear it again, right? It's really more about understanding that your value remains intact while your circumstances are changing. That's really important to understand, right? Because your value is not going anywhere, even if your circumstances are changing, right? And that's what I have for you, Capricorn. I hope this was helpful for you. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time. Bye bye. Hi, Aquarius. So this little dance between Leo and you is going to be seventh house, first house axis. So for you guys, I mean, this end of month energy is just so deeply personal because we got the moon, we got Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde, all in your first house. So you're going to be reaching this major emotional culmination around who you are now, who you're expected to be, not recognizing who you were expected to be and recognizing the divide between that and who you are right now. Um, really like who are you now and what do you actually want? Because this Pluto retrograde in your first house, like you guys are undergoing it, right? This long-term transformation. For a lot of you, it's going to be your appearance. you know, because the first house, excuse me, is your physical appearance. Could be your identity, your personal power, the way that you move through the world, right? That's what we read through that first house is the path that you're on and just the way that you're just moving through the world, right? So you could feel that just that older version of you is dying away, and it could be pretty trippy when you're feeling like that, but you don't have it all figured out as far as like what you're growing into. But you may no longer, you just find yourself, you're no longer able to perform that identity that was created around keeping everybody else comfortable, right? And this full moon is going to bring this very real realization about how much you've changed. You're going to be realize it's very within yourself, right? Because it's a moon energy, so it's very emotional. And Juno retrograde, right? This is always brings review. Retrogrades always bring review. In that first house is going to cause you to really create the situation where you're reevaluating promises that you made to yourself. You know, these stories that you tell yourself that you know how things need to be. And you're going to be recognizing your identity became overly defined by fill in the blank, by a relationship, a marriage, a role, a commitment, whatever it is. Now, across the sky is that Jupiter Cazimi in your seventh house, and this could bring a huge emphasis to relationships and partnerships, your bosses, contracts, marriage, clients, collaborations, what else? All important one-on-one connections. So, a relationship can expand here with this Cazimi in the seventh. A new relationship or partnership can become significant. An existing relationship can reach a major turning point. Maybe you're going to decide to, I'm going to stay optimistic here, maybe you're going to decide to move in together or get married, right? Someone may offer support or opportunity or wisdom or encouragement or a new perspective when it, you know, maybe through work or some sort of contract, right? But it's not only about what another person brings into your life, it's also about what all of these relationships, all these different kinds of seventh house relationships reveal about you. Because a significant connection can become the catalyst for a major realization about who you are and your needs and your boundaries and your capacity for intimacy. So as you change, your relationships have to respond to that, right? Obviously. Because you have that Uranus in your sign, right? So you can't have Uranus in your sign and not change. And then, of course, if you're changing, then these relationships are going to change. It doesn't mean relationships are automatically ending. Don't want to look at it as glass half empty. It means relationships built around that older version of you is likely going to need to evolve. So, and the square to Chiron in your fourth is going to show these family wounds, these childhood patterns, this emotional insecurity, these unresolved issues connected with home and belonging and recognizing how they've impacted your decisions and how it is that you do relationship and how it is that you walk through the world, right? You can recognize that your adult relationships have been shaped by what felt safe or unsafe in your earliest environment. So you can be afraid of abandonment, of being controlled, of losing yourself in another person, or you might even just be afraid that no one will be there for you if you are just unapologetically yourself. Now, Uranus and Saturn in your fifth, this can bring unexpected developments involving love. Now, it's fifth house, so that's more of like an earlier version of love, of falling in love, love affairs, romance, creativity, children, entrepreneurship, pleasure, and happiness. Um, you know, going into that, so I'm sorry, I said Uranus being in your first house. I meant Pluto in your first house. Pluto is all about change and transformation. Um, but for a lot of you, a romantic situation can change very suddenly, or there could be a creative breakthrough that helps you express a side of yourself that you've been suppressing. This is so great if you are the creative type, right? But whatever it is, it's like you're reclaiming a joy, an element of joy after a period of emotional heaviness. So when I say the romantic situation changing, it's because it's Uranus, and Uranus is very connected to the future. It's being leveled up, or you're meeting that person, or it's like suddenly out of nowhere, right? Now, Sedna can bring healing around the fear that opening your heart will eventually lead to betrayal or abandonment, whatever it is. And that's such a blessing in there, right? Now, Neptune retrograde in your third, that can transform your communication, your perception, it's third house, the way we think, right? The thinking patterns. It's also writing and teaching and relationships with your siblings or people in your immediate environment, your extended family, right? Whatever it is. But you're realizing that you have not always communicated your full truth, Aquarius, like who you really are, what you really feel. You might have expected other people to intuitively understand what you've needed, and you didn't feel like you should have to do that, right? But you might also recognize where confusion and assumptions or idealization have affected your relationships as well, right? So communicate, right? Because sometimes you guys can tend to hold things in and assume or believe that other people should know what it is that you are thinking and feeling. Now, and just because you can do it to other people doesn't mean that everybody can do it to you, right? Now, the trine from Neptune retrograde to this Jupiter cazimi can support, in a very compassionate way, conversations and emotional understanding and any kind of creative collaboration. Very good for counseling, for teaching, for writing, spiritually meaningful communication. But it's Neptune and he's retrograde. So he's asking you to communicate very clearly rather than relying on implication, fantasy, hope, anything like that, right? Ask the questions, fully explain yourself. Don't get offended if somebody is not asking a lot of questions about you. Offer the information, okay? You do want to notice whether you're reaching, you know, this point in your connections where perhaps you're reacting to the other person in front of you um, in a way that's speaking more to some sort of old wound that the person has activated. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes we have these conversations like, ooh, that person said something that activated that wound that actually may have nothing to do with that person or that moment, but just something that happened once upon a time, and you're very aware of it. Because one thing about this kind of energy, because of where it's sitting, seventh house is always the house of mirrors, right? Relationships can be mirrors, but not everything reflected back to you is a permanent truth about who you are, right? And that's something that you have to understand now. You are changing. Your relationships are going to be changing because of it, the way you do it. The goal is not to lose yourself in another person. It's not to reject intimacy in order to protect your independence. The goal here is more to become more fully yourself within relationship. And don't be afraid to communicate. All right, my friends, that is what I have for you. Until next time, bye bye. Pisces rising for you guys. This little dance is going on between the sixth house and the 12th house, between Leo and Aquarius. For you guys, this is going to be bringing major realizations about your health for some of you, work, routines, responsibilities, your emotional well-being, and just your sense of personal worth. So it's a lot there. This is an important axis. And with this Jupiter cazimi in your sixth house, this can bring expansion or improvement involving work, your employment, um, your health, your daily routines, your coworkers, your employees, your day-to-day responsibilities. What else is sixth house? Your pets, your domestic pets or fur babies, or just any of the systems that organize your life. So, what can this look like, right? A new work opportunity can present itself to you, which would be great if you're looking for new work. You might find a better way to just structure your schedule or receive really helpful information concerning something that's going on with your health or just your overall wellness. You might feel motivated to improve your health, your habits, your daily routines, um, all of that stuff. But keep in mind that Jupiter also magnifies. So you can suddenly realize how much you've taken on. You may clearly see that your current routine just can't, it's not sustainable. It can't keep going like this, right? You might have expanded your responsibilities beyond what your physical and emotional bandwidth can comfortably sustain, right? And with this Hygeia conjuncting Jupiter placing a very strong emphasis on prevention and healing, right? Because it's a house of health and balance, being balanced, and the connection between daily habits and long-term well-being. Hygeia makes it really difficult for us to ignore that. So there will be a bit of a focal point on that. And Vulcan can show tremendous strength, but it can also show where you've been forcing yourself to continue through your exhaustion, through not feeling 100% right. Now, across from this, we have Pluto and Juno both retrograde, and that full moon in Aquarius in your 12th, which is going to be bringing unconscious material to the surface. So, like I mentioned in the other video, all the old stuff that hangs in the 12th house, old fears, grief, resentment, exhaustion, self-sabotage, guilt, secrets, patterns of sacrifice, right? Because it's a Neptune ruled house where you get in your own way. All this stuff is going to become a lot more visible to you. And you could recognize that some of the daily challenges that you have are connected to something a lot deeper. Maybe you repeatedly overworked because productivity makes you feel safe. Or maybe you take care of everyone because you're uncomfortable needing anything for yourself. Or maybe you're always busy because slowing down would force you to feel something that you've been trying to avoid, right? Or maybe you've unconsciously accepted the belief that your value comes only from how useful you are to other people. And with that Pluto retrograde in the 12th, this is going to show those deeply buried survival patterns that can include all of that yuck and muck that I just mentioned, right? And with that Juno retrograde, this can just show these unconscious agreements that you made with yourself, where you really have to look at these, where you just kind of say to yourself, I don't need that much. I'm not going to burden anybody. I'm just going to keep going on no matter how tired I am, no matter how fill in the blank I am, you know? I'm just going to get everybody to love me by being super helpful and just being everything to everyone. You realize this, and the square to Chiron in your third can bring this vulnerability around communicating and learning and writing and siblings and relatives or just feeling heard. So it's like, are you overdoing and overstretching just to try to get people to be more on the same wavelength as you, you know? Because you could also just struggle with saying what it is that you actually need. Because if you say what you really need, then you're going to feel misunderstood. And you're really running the risk of being sidelined, and you don't want that. And it's not because of anything even that's going on right now. It's likely because some old experience that you had that was probably super uncomfortable and very hurtful, and being saying that mildly, right? Taught you a very bad lesson that speaking honestly creates conflict, criticism, or rejection. So it's like, why do it? And then at the same time, you might even doubt your own intelligence or your ability to communicate effectively, even when you have something important to say. Or even if you know you have the right words, not having a lot of faith that the people that you're communicating it to are going to receive it the way that you intend it to be received. Then it's like, why even bother, right? At the same time, we have Uranus and Saturn in that fourth house, and this could bring some changes involving fourth house things: home, property, real estate, family, parents, living arrangements, your emotional foundation. So, for a lot of you, a change at home can affect your work and health, or some sort of family information can come upon you, something going on within your, maybe connected to your first family, or you might also start breaking free from a family pattern that's been shaping your responsibility for a very long time. You know, any of these things. And we also have this Neptune retrograde in your second house of money. And this makes money or your talents, well, second house things, talents, your self-worth, your values, your personal security, very important at this point. So you're likely going to be reviewing where your financial boundaries have been very unclear, or maybe where you've undervalued your work. You know, you're keeping your prices low, you're working for too little, you're giving too much away. You may have trusted something in something that, you know, you had hoped it would work out. but it just didn't have the practical structure, to last. And it's somehow impacting your finances. But Neptune retrograde in the second, it's not just about financial confusion, though. It can be financial confusion. Neptune can be confusing. So obviously, in the second house, we can be connected to that. But it could also help you reconnect with talents that are intuitive and artistic and healing and spiritual and compassionate and imaginative, because all of those things are very Neptunian. And the trine from Neptune to Jupiter Cazimi, very nice, can help you bring those talents into your daily work. So you might realize that something you naturally do has a genuine value. Can I just say, this is very good for those of you who are interested and maybe becoming like a tarot reader or doing Reiki or meditation, anything spiritual, anything. Did I say meditation? I'm telling you guys, I'm repeating myself, whatever. But anything like that, light work, crystal work, anything like that. Just very, very nice. Just a gift that once felt difficult to define may become part of like your practical day. It's like your practical job, your business routine, whatever it is. But the key is to give form here to something that's inspirational to you. Create boundaries around your time. So important. Set a price for your work. Clarify expectations. My goodness, with Neptune retrograde in there, please do that. Don't assume that people are automatically going to recognize your value if you continually minimize it. All right. The advice here that I'm giving you, just recognize that healing isn't simply about becoming more efficient at carrying around an unsustainable amount of responsibility. Something deeper has to change, right? So you might have to say no and ask for help or change your routine. Or you might have to acknowledge what you're really feeling, and you may have to just stop equating this self-sacrifice with love. And like the most important work happening now may not be visible to anybody else, but it can change absolutely everything. Okay, Pisces, so that is what I have for you. I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. See you next time. Okay, guys, so just to wrap this up and drive it all home with this Jupiter Cazimi and full moon and all the other stuff that's going on at the end of the month, um, just understand that this astrology can bring it's going to bring a time when you see both the possibility and the price of change. And that's life, right? Because Jupiter Cazimi and Leo is saying there is more life available to you. Okay, so that's number one. So, whatever that is, it's going to be very different for each of you, but more happiness, more confidence, more visibility, more creativity or love or purpose, abundance, courage, whatever it is. But Pluto retrograde in Aquarius is saying, yes, but you can't take the old pattern with you, right? Leo, more of life available to you. Aquarius, okay, but you can't take what you've been doing with you. So there's going to have to be a balancing out. You can't create a radically different future while remaining psychologically committed to every role, every agreement, every fear, every loyalty, or every survival response that shaped you up to now. And with the Juno retrograde in there, Juno retrograde is letting you know that some agreements need to be reconsidered. Now, that could be within your marriage, your relationships, your business partnership, a financial arrangement, a friendship, family, some professional commitment. But it can just also include promises that you've made to yourself when you were just simply trying to survive. Now, Hygeia, the asteroid of health, is letting you know you need to pay attention to what needs healing before it becomes impossible to ignore. So this can involve something quite literally within the body, but it can also involve your environment, your habits, your mental patterns, your emotional diet. How are you dealing with your anxiety, your stress, your relationships, your boundaries, or just the way that you repeatedly expose yourself to things that do stress you out? Really looking at that. Then we have very strong Vulcan in there telling you to recognize your strength. Stop assuming that strength means endlessly enduring what's hurting you, right? You may be so unbelievably strong. But sometimes your strength is leaving. Sometimes your greatest strength is leaving a situation and saying, well, this is not for me anymore. Sometimes strength is resting and saying, I need a break, or it's asking for help, or it's admitting that something that you've carried for years is just simply too heavy to keep carrying. You can't do it anymore. And then we have that Chiron and Taurus for the rest of the summer. Chiron and Taurus is telling you that growth is likely going to touch the exact place where you feel the most vulnerable. So understand that with Chiron and Taurus. So this wound can involve Taurian things, money, maybe not money, security, survival, the body. Remember, Taurus is the overall health of the internal body, self-worth, your stability, or the fear that change will leave you unsupported. But the wound is not necessarily proof that you need to stay where you are. It's not. It's likely just going to be showing you where you're healing and your focus and your support and you know your practical approach needs to be focused on, right? And then that Uranus and Sedna in Gemini, look, guys, this is a very important combination because this is saying like there's another way of understanding your story. Conversation has to change something. It will change something. Information is likely going to change that you're receiving. A new idea is coming in that's changing something. The story that you've been telling yourself is no longer going to be the only interpretation available. It's not. And with that Neptune retrograde in Aries, you're being told to return to that vision beneath the fantasy. It's not about believing that everything will like magically work out, kumbaya pie in the sky. It's about reconnecting with the deeper truth and faith and creativity and spiritual meaning underneath the desire for the change. And really being honest with yourself about where you projected your dream onto another person or where you've waited for someone else to rescue you or validate you or choose you or give you permission. Where have you confused intuition with wishful thinking? And being very mindful of where you might have abandoned a genuine dream because disappointment made it safer to pretend that you no longer wanted it. And I know that's resonating with a lot of you. Now, this trine between Jupiter Cazimi and Neptune retrograde can restore hope. It can. It brings lovely energy, imagination, understanding, compassion, just this renewed kind of sense of purpose. But it asks you to combine faith with discernment. So don't drink the Kool-Aid, especially at the end of the month, okay? Ask the questions, be grounded. If Pluto is revealing a truth, Neptune is going to help you imagine what comes after it and just be very, very honest with yourself about that. Okay. Yeah. I mean, look, sometimes the breakthrough that could come with this kind of energy is that you just finally see clearly enough to stop abandoning yourself in order to keep everything else exactly the same. Okay. And that, my friends, will wrap it up. I will not be talking about this anymore. I will see you guys next time when we discuss August 2026. Until then, take care.